Thank you for being with us this morning. It's always a pleasure to have you at Capitol Day, but it's always fun to just sit down and talk about some of the great things that's happening in the state of Mississippi. And, you know, in just a few days, you're going to be sworn in for your second term. And, but I wanted to take just a minute and talk about some of the great things that have happened in your first term and how we build on it. And I think a lot of people probably don't understand the impact of what has taken place despite dealing with a pandemic. And I don't know, we've talked about, I don't know how many natural disasters that you had to deal with in a certain amount of time. But during that same time, over $8 billion of capital investment from an economic development standpoint, creating about 14,000 jobs over time here in the state, including a major one up in the Columbus area with Steel Dynamics aluminum plant. A lot of momentum. How do we keep that momentum going?
Well, first of all, thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here with you today. And we have had tremendous success in economic development. The kind of success that Mississippi's never, ever seen before. And much of it did come right after the pandemic. And so what I would tell you is, you know, my motto to my team is always the same, which is, you know, with great challenges come great opportunities. And the thing that the pandemic allowed us to do in 2020 and to a certain extent in 2021 is sort of take a step back and analyze everything that was going on in government and figure out where are the areas where we can make a real difference. And at the end of the day, the pandemic gave us the opportunity to show to the world that Mississippi was open for business. And it also gave us the opportunity to show to the world, CEO, and I still hear it from CEOs all the time, some of you in the room, but also all around the country and around the globe, that Mississippians during the pandemic showed up for work and they produced the products they were supposed to produce and got them to the marketplace. And the reality is that didn't happen in every state across America. That didn't happen in a lot of states across America. And so it put us in a position unlike anything that we've ever seen, giving us the opportunity to show to the world that yes, we are open for business and that we can really see that we have a workforce that really matters. And so that was certainly something that was critical to our success. But also, you know, you and I have talked, we knew that we had challenges for literally since what feels like the beginning of time in the K through 12 educational system. Well, in 2012 and 2013, we passed conservative reforms that are making a huge difference. And that's, you know, I tell people, I almost choked on my catfish when I read in the New York Times the Mississippi Miracle story. Because they don't ever say anything positive about Mississippi, right? But they couldn't help but write something positive about our state, because in K through 12, we are winning now when compared to our peers. But it wasn't just limited to that. We had to also focus on workforce development, workforce training. We had to work on site development. You know, we've done things in the area and in the realm of site development that no other state in America is doing. One of the biggest challenges to new economic development projects in America today is the lack of ready sites. That's true in Mississippi, but it's really true all around the country. And so we made a decision in my administration the first year. We found $27 million from various pots, cobbled it together, and started a site development program. We then went to the legislature the next year and asked them for $50 million, and they gave it to us. And so we had $77 million. And then last year we asked for 50 again. We got 20, we need more, but we got 20. And that's one of the things I'll say to all of you. If you really want to see economic development continue to take off in Mississippi, help me get more site development money. Help me get more sites in areas all across the state. And I can show you on our MDA website, there are 30 sites ready to be developed right now. We just need more money to invest in those sites. And those investments are going to consist of water, sewer, roads, core functions of government that we ought to be doing anyway. And so that's, you know, we got a lot going on, and you might can tell I'm kind of excited about it. So,
well, I want to touch on real quick one of the things you mentioned, and that's the positive attention that the state has been receiving, particularly on the education benefit. I mean, I know you were very involved as the lieutenant governor on the third grade reading gate, which has resulted in that. It's those long-term benefits that I think that are going to pay off, and I want you to talk a little bit about that. But I want to also mention that, you know, this happened over a 10-year period, so things don't happen overnight. One of the other things that has happened in the last couple of years in your term as governor is the creation of the Office of Workforce Development. And that Office of Workforce Development is just a couple of years old, but we're already starting to see some benefits. Do you think both from the benefits we're seeing in education and what we're expected to see in the long-term outcomes with workforce, how is that really going to help move us as we go forward?
Well, I'll tell you. So let's think about, let's start with the K through 12 area, because that's where that's going to take the longest, right? Because we're starting with kindergartners, whereas if you start talking about workforce development, hopefully we're starting with 9th, 10th, and 11th graders. And so when they start getting into the workforce 3-4 years from now, they should be ready. But the key, we believe, early in 12 and 13 is you got to start with a better foundation. And if you start with a better foundation, your workforce development programs are going to be better because you have better students getting that workforce development and workforce training. And so where we find ourselves today is if you look at the 4th graders in Mississippi and you look at 4th grade reading and 4th grade math results, our kids, relative to every other state in the Southeast, we're doing better than them in 4th grade reading and 4th grade math. So I want to begin by saying, if you have the smartest 4th graders in the southeastern United States, which we do, then in 10 years, you're going to have the smartest workforce in the southeastern United States, because those 4th graders are going to continue to matriculate through school, and they're going to be graduating high school at a much higher level than what Mississippians were graduating high school 10, 15, 20 years ago. So let's start with that. That's critically important, and that's happening. Now let's talk about the Office of Workforce Development, Accelerate Mississippi. You know, one of the things that I find interesting, having been doing this for a long, long time, some of you may think longer than I should have been, but having been in government for a long, long time, the thing that strikes me is I started working on economic development projects the first week or 2 or 3 or 4 of the Haley Barbour administration as state treasurer. And the question that was always asked first, back from about 2004 to 2012 or so, was, tell me about your incentives. Tell me about your incentives. How much money are you going to write? What kind of check are you going to write me to come to Mississippi? And by the way, the companies always get around to that, but that's no longer the first question. Moving into 2012 to 2020, the first question became, tell me about your workforce. And that's one of the areas that when I came in as governor, I think we had some focus on it for many, many years, but maybe not the kind of focus that we needed. And so that's the reason we worked with the legislature, MEC, and a lot of other groups to Accelerate, the Office of Workforce Development. It's more or less private sector run. I mean, it is a government entity that has a 7-person board that is appointed by the governor, lieutenant governor, and it is private sector industry leaders telling us what we need to invest in. And what we're trying to do is invest in workforce programs where we know there are going to be jobs available in the next 50 years. Just to give an example, we have invested over the last several years about $126 million on 135 new and expanding programs, mostly at our community colleges, like a huge majority at our community colleges. But we've done it in areas where we believe there are going to be high demand, good paying jobs in the future. So as an example, energy and IT. I think we can all agree that there's a lot of opportunities in that space over the next 10 to 15, 20 years. We've invested $14 million in new programs and expanding programs. Healthcare, we've invested $55 million in healthcare programs to train the healthcare workforce of tomorrow. We've invested $30 million in advanced manufacturing. We've invested $17 million in programs for logistics and construction. Again, all of those are areas where we're not just guessing that there are going to be jobs available for the next 20 years. We're pretty highly confident that there are going to be jobs available, and we need to train our people and invest in our people to be able to do those jobs of the next 50 years. And what I would say about, and I'll just conclude by this, and the reason, because I'm not big on creating a new government entity, right? Y'all probably would agree with that. You probably heard me say that before. But the reason we wanted to create the Office of Workforce Development and the reason we wanted to create Accelerate Mississippi is because we had a lot of different groups doing a lot of really good things, and we were spending a lot of money, in fact, somewhere between $350 and $370 million a year on workforce development. But there was not a coordinated effort. And there's got to be coordination, and there's got to make to ensure that there's accountability, there's got to be coordination. And we know that if we're going to spend that much money every year doing something as important as workforce training, we got to have an accountability model. And that's why Accelerate Mississippi spent the first, I don't remember, a couple years on the 18th floor of the Sillers building. I don't know if you know this, but the governor's office is on the 18th and the 19th floor of the Sillers building, because we wanted to tell everybody, all of you in the room, how important this was to the future of the state in our view, but also so that we had that accountability. And now they're doing fantastic work, and they've moved on, and we're looking to see what we're going to do next in the 18th floor of the governor's office in the Sillers building.
Well, and it's outcomes. I think that's the big thing that in all of the time that you and I have had the opportunity to talk and work together is having policies that really improve outcomes, particularly when it comes to education. Earlier, when Jeff and I were talking, we talked about MEC's newest initiative, which is we refer to as AIM, which is really, it's got three legs to the stool. It's balancing academics and career readiness with the K-12 accountability model. It's looking at post-secondary attainment, how do we improve those numbers, and it's also looking at opportunities for more young professionals here in the state. As we think about outcomes as it relates to education at all levels, what are some of the other things that you are seeing as important out there?
Well, first of all, let me commend you on your conversation around the accountability model, because while we have seen tremendous progress in K through 12 education, the kind of progress we ought to all brag about, by the way, regardless of our political views and our political affiliations, there is really special things happening in the classroom all across Mississippi. But one of the things that we have noticed is the accountability model in the state focuses on those testing methodologies, but it doesn't necessarily test on the career readiness piece of the equation, and therefore we think that the accountability model needs to be tweaked, not overthrown, not overhauled, tweaked. I heard new Speaker of the House, Jason White, talk about that in his speech on Tuesday, so I commend him for his willingness to tackle that, and I commend you as well, because I think that's really important, because it was Jeb Bush who said in education, and this is true not only in education, but he was specific about education, what gets measured gets done. And in the accountability model today, the local school superintendents, all of whom are doing a good job, they don't get a lot of credit for the career readiness piece of what they're doing in our K through 12 schools, and I think it's important that they get credit. The career coaches, another investment that we've made in the state of Mississippi through Accelerate Mississippi, is a prime example of sort of how do we take models that work and overlay them in the workforce space. So the story that I always tell is when I was growing up at Florence High School, we had a great counselor that sort of guided me in the classes I needed to take at Florence High School. So number one, I could graduate. Number two, I could get into college. And number three, hopefully stay eligible to play basketball when I was in college. Those are the only three things I really cared about at the time. But she did a fantastic job of helping me navigate counseling through that process. But the reality is, what we all know is we need more college graduates in Mississippi, but even so, we're going to have about 70 to 75% of all of our students that are not going to go to college. They're going to go straight into the workforce. So if that counselor model worked so well for those of us who are going to college, shouldn't there be a similar model for those that are going directly into the workforce? Hence, career coaches being born. This has been tried at the local levels, primarily in Northeast Mississippi and in Jackson County in the South, with great success. And I will tell you, we're a couple years into this, trying to move this to a statewide model, and there were certain school districts that were, shall we say, reluctant to participate early on because these career coaches that are in their schools are not paid for by the local schools, they're paid for by the state. And so there was some reluctance originally and initially, but what I would tell you a couple years in, there's very little reluctance. And what we have seen is we've had great success hiring really talented people to be career coaches, to be in our schools. And then finally, I would just say this career coach model also is taking after what we did to get where we are in fourth grade reading and fourth grade math. We went in and the state invested in fourth grade reading coaches. The state invested in fourth grade math coaches, and those investments have a huge return on investment, a huge ROI, and this career coach I think is going to have the similar kind of ROI for improving our workforce over the next 5 to 10 years.
And we're really excited about that, and in just a little while we're going to have 3 career coaches who are on the ground talk about what they're doing and what they're hearing from students, and I think that's going to be.
And let me say this about the career coaches: for them to be successful, there can't just be a buy-in by me or a buy-in by Delbert or a buy-in by Jason or a buy-in by the legislature. Y'all have to buy in, because if you're not communicating with your local career coaches, then the model isn't working. Because you as business and industry, in every ecosystem, we created 8 ecosystems. This is actually something I ran on in 2019. We created 8 ecosystems in our state. We have an ecosystem coordinator that is helping coordinate with our career coaches. But at the end of the day, if you're in the Mississippi Delta and you have job availability, you need to be talking to our ecosystem coordinator and our career coaches in our schools to make sure they are aware of the kind of jobs that you have available. The reason we created the ecosystem model is because we know the kind of people, we have a great need for shipbuilders on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, but we ain't building a lot of ships in Northeast Mississippi. And so we got to make sure that we tailor the model to the specific needs in each region of the state. And so I need your buy-in, and I think most of you probably have already participated, but that's critically important that those of you in the private sector that have job availability are communicating with Accelerate Mississippi and communicating with our career coaches, because it's all of us working together.
No, and that's kind of going to lead to my next question, and I'll start by saying, I've reached that age, Governor, where I don't always remember what I did yesterday. But one thing I do remember is the first conversation you and I had, you were still governor-elect. You talked about raising per capita income. All of the things that we've talked about today are going to play into doing that. So why do we have to continue to focus on this goal of yours that you said in when you took office?
I'll never forget in my first speech as governor, after I was sworn in, I talked about the fact that I'm an old economics major, the numbers matter to me. But I said in that speech, and there was a lot of debate amongst my staff, that perhaps maybe I shouldn't say this because it was setting the bar too high, but I said, if you can only judge me on one financial or economic stat my term as governor, I urge you to judge me on per capita income. Because at the end of the day, that's what really matters for Mississippians all across the state. And I'm really, really happy to tell you that in the first quarter of 2019, Mississippi's per capita income was right at $38,000 a year. In the third quarter of 2023, our per capita incomes were over $48,000 a year. That means that every Mississippian on average is making $10,000 more a year now than they were when I was running for governor. That's almost a 30% increase in per capita income. And what we all know is with the inflation caused by the significant spending in Washington, D.C., a lot of that increases in per capita income has been eaten up by it costing more every time you go to the gas pump, every time you go to the grocery store. But just think if we hadn't had those per capita income increases, we hadn't seen I want to find out, I've got to ask my staff this, how long did it take us to go from $28,000 a year in per capita income to $38,000? How long did it take us to increase by $10,000, and then how long did it take us less than 4 years to go from $38,000 to $48,000? And we got to keep investing to make sure that becomes a reality, because you talked earlier about economic development. I'm extremely and incredibly proud of our economic development success. But what I'm most proud of is the average wages that these companies are paying when they're moving into our state. Aluminum Dynamics promised 1,000 new jobs at $93,000 a year. That's how you drive per capita incomes, is you bring jobs into the state. You see companies like many of yours that are expanding, that are paying higher wages because they require higher amount of skills. And we've got to meet the demand of what those skills are.
Well, we greatly appreciate you being here, but I cannot let you go without talking about taxes. It's something that MEC has been very involved in, particularly on the business side. You were very helpful in creating a fair and competitive tax environment back when we did the Fairness Tax Initiative when you were Lieutenant Governor. Also, we've seen the franchise tax being phased out, which is a big part of helping businesses. And so we're reducing a lot of things, and now we're in the process of beginning to reduce personal income tax. So why is it important that we continue to focus on having a very strong tax environment in the state?
Well, I would tell you that, I have this theory that if you want more of something, you ought to tax it less. If you want more of something, you want to tax it less. That's the reason when we passed the initial Taxpayer Pay Raise Act, one of the key components was the total elimination of the corporate franchise tax. As you all know, the corporate franchise tax basically is nothing more than a tax on capital inside Mississippi businesses. We need more capital invested in our businesses. We don't need to tax more capital amongst our businesses. And so we're headed very near the end of that 10-year phase-in of the phase out of the corporate franchise tax. And I think the same can be said when it comes to the individual income tax. Let's first brag on what we've done. There are 9 states in America that have no corporate income tax. 9 states in America. That means there are 41 states that do have a corporate income tax. Of the 41 states that have a corporate income tax, Mississippi has the 5th lowest now. The 4% all-in tax, Mississippi has the 5th lowest. And for those of you who are very interested on what that means for those on the lower end of the income earning scale, Mississippi has the highest deduction of any state in America, where the first $36,000 for a married couple is taxed at 0%. So right now we have 0 income tax for anyone who makes $36,000 and below. We have 0 income tax for anyone who is retired, because we made a decision as a state from a policy standpoint that we wanted to be a retirement state 30 years ago. Mississippi taxes retirement income at 0%, and I'm good with that. But we don't just need more retirees in Mississippi, we need more workers in Mississippi. We need more employees in Mississippi. And so if the income tax at 0% is good enough for retirees, I think it ought to be good enough for those who are actually working. Let them keep more of their money, and I think that what we'll see is a flourishing economy, not only because we would be growing economic output, but also because it would help us grow population. You look at the 3 states that increased population the most over the last 10 years, they're all in the Southeast. They're all competitive, friendly competitors to us: Texas, Tennessee, and Florida, all of which have certain unique advantages, to be fair. But one of those advantages is all 3 of them are a no income tax state. And so we're going to continue to push forward on that. When I was Lieutenant Governor the last year, our total annual operating budget at the state of Mississippi was $5.7 billion. We've collected almost somewhere between $7.5 and $8 billion in each of the last 3 years. Where there is a will, there is a way. And we have the ability, I believe, to continue to lower and ultimately eliminate the income tax in our state, which will make us more competitive from an economic development standpoint and make us more competitive from a population standpoint.
Well, we've covered a lot of stuff today. Before I let you go, is there anything else that you want to touch on that we as an organization can help you be more successful in making sure we're moving our state forward, and I think as we talk about Mississippi's moment?
Well, the only thing I'll say is, first of all, thank you for giving me the opportunity to be on. Thanks to all of you for helping us over the last 20 years make significant strides in our state. And finally, I just say, when you think about advocacy at the legislature and advocacy with statewide elected officials, that old saying, that Haley used to use all the time that supposedly, or he claimed that Fred Smith said, which was the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. The main thing in Mississippi is workforce development, site development, educational achievement levels, and job creation and economic development. If we can all focus on those things, I think you'll see tremendous successes in both the short and the long run.
Well, Governor, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Looking forward to continuing to
Enjoyed
work
it.
with you, and have a great term.
Thanks, Scott.